Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. Tonight I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our guest speaker to the stage, Major General Thomas Seamands. Before he comes up, however, I'd like to give a brief introduction. Major General Seamands is a graduate of the University of Dayton, earning a degree in business management. While at the University of Dayton, he participated in the ROTC program, commissioning into the Adjutant General Corps. He has a vast experience in the Army and also has a vast experience in education to back that up, to include graduating from the Army Command and General Staff College, a master's degree from Webster University, as well as being a fellow at Harvard and MIT. Major General Seamands is currently the Commanding General at the Human Resources Command in Fort Knox, Kentucky. Without further ado, I welcome General Seamands to the stage.
My name is Tom Seamands, and I'm an American soldier. I'm very proud of it. I'm honored to be here today to talk to you. So thanks for making time out of your day. To the cadets, you guys dry out pretty well. You guys look good on the field. Appreciate that. You know, today I had the opportunity to walk around Notre Dame. Got a great tour from some of the ROTC cadets, and I was struck by a couple things. I was struck by the similarities of the Army culture and the similarities here in Notre Dame, the sense of selfless service, the sense of being part of something bigger than yourself, just the kindness that's shown to each other. So I think there are a lot of similarities between the two. I've got about 10 slides I want to go through, but before I do that, what I'd like to do is just tell you what I've been doing the last 10 years, and there are some business applications, I think, to what I'll talk about. When I was at Harvard, I actually was based out of the Kennedy School of Government, which in many respects is kind of like the kumbaya of Harvard. And I also took a lot of classes at the business school. And what I found at the business school, I was probably a lot more comfortable there because a lot of the things that you study here in the business school, Dean, are very similar to what we do in the Army. Before I go to the slides, what I like to do is, like I said, just talk a little bit about what we're doing. And I'll apologize up front for using the personal pronoun I, me, or my, but it's what I've been doing, so I apologize for that up front. So about 10 years ago, I was selected to be the general officer manager. So as a colonel in the United States Army, I managed every general officer, which is an interesting task because they all rank you for quite a bit. But it's all about developing senior leaders, developing talent management, making sure that we have the right bench to do different things. I went from that job to a job where I was the head of personnel for about half the Army at United States Forces Command. As I got ready to leave that job, I went to the Pentagon. And my boss, General Rodriguez at the Forces Command, said, "Hey, Tom, the job you're going to go to is probably going to be pretty easy." I said, "Sir, how do you figure that?" He said, "Well, one of the main things you're going to do is draw down the Army." I said, "Sir, how is that easy?" He said, "Well, it may not be easy, but just look at it this way." He said, "If you do it right, we have a better Army on the backside of the drawdown." He said, "If you screw it up, it takes a generation to fix." So with a little bit of pressure, I took that job. And as we worked on the drawdown, we wanted to do it maintaining readiness because we are still a nation at war. We have about 6,000 soldiers in Iraq. We have about 13,000 in Afghanistan. We have about 3,000 in Syria, as I speak, keeping us safe in what they do. So we tried real hard to get it right. So the very first board that we ran, we identified captains and majors between about 7 and 12 years of service to leave the Army earlier than they wanted to because the Army was getting smaller. We couldn't afford the force that we had. So we worked really hard to get it right. And the very first board we did, we're monitoring social media, news outlets to figure out how we're doing. And this one major wrote Tom Rick's blog in the Washington Post. And he said, "I don't know who the idiot was who came up with this plan." That was me. He said, "But they just don't get it." He said, "I'm brilliant, I'm smart, I'm a great leader. Yes, I was convicted of drunk driving, but that should not have factored into the decision to keep me." And I found it in life, when you study somebody who thinks differently than you often get smarter. So I'm reading this major's response. I don't agree with him, but I'm trying to understand where he's coming from. And about a week later, a captain responds to the same blog in the Washington Post and says, "Major, what you need to understand is the Army didn't separate you. You separate yourself because the Army is a profession based on discipline, values, and you've, quite frankly, violated those values, Major. So I'm thinking this is a pretty smart captain. He agrees with me. And so then he goes on to say, and besides, we're all subjected to the same idiotic bureaucratic personnel policies. That's me. So there's a thing called the Global Address Book. And so I looked up the good captain in the Global Address Book. I introduced myself as Major General Seamands, the guy who is responsible for the idiotic and same bureaucratic personnel policies. And I said, hey, instead of throwing bricks, why don't you contribute to the discussion, help us get better? So about 4 or 5 days go by, I don't hear anything from him. And then finally, I get a response. You might call it a manifesto. He had some pretty strong ideas. But we actually used some of those ideas. And he was my Napoleon's corporal. I used to bounce ideas off of him. I say, hey, here's what we're going to do. What do you think? And the reason I tell you that story is as I go through my briefing, if you disagree with me, I'd appreciate you challenge me on something because that's the only way you really get better with things. So the Army, up until the 23rd of December 2016, was getting smaller. We hit a high water mark about 566,000. And then when the budget sequestration happened, the Army got a downward path to get smaller. Our plan was to go down to 450,000. And in December, Congress approved and President Obama signed the law that actually stopped the drawdown and brought us back up, so we're going to 476. So after 5 years of telling people you have to go home early, you're probably not going to get promoted, it's a very competitive environment, we're switching gears and we're actually growing, we're hiring now. So it's not a bad problem to have as we go on. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I can talk about that or I can talk about anything you want. What I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and talk about some observations I've had over 36 years of being a soldier. Next slide. I think it's important that you eat what you're given. Bill, please. That, by the way, is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff eating a meal ready to eat, which soldiers and Marines and everybody eat in combat. Next slide. Sleep where you're put. And the point of those two phrases is you don't always get to control your destiny. So if you have an attitude and it's important to be aspirational, it's important to have ambition, but you have to have a start point, and you may not get the job you want, you may not get the opportunity you want right out the bat, but third point, always improve your foxhole. And that's kind of the life of a soldier. You may not pick the station you're at, you may not pick the deployment. Those soldiers I talked about who are in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan today probably didn't volunteer to go there. Our nation asked them to go, and while they're there, they're doing things to keep us safe here. They're eating what they're given, they're sleeping where they're put, and they're improving their foxhole every day. Next slide. Move to the friction. What I found in organizations is it's very easy and very comfortable to be in a safe place, whether that's in combat or whether that's in the office or wherever you are. But in an organization, friction is important. Oftentimes that's where the work gets done. And so if you move to the friction, if you look for the friction in the organization, you will move forward. One of my professors at Harvard was a guy named Ron Heifetz, who's written a book, and he talks about the disequilibrium. And so if you can create disequilibrium in the organization, you actually can move it to a higher level and move on. But if you sit in your office and kind of wait for somebody to come to you, you won't go to the friction, you won't see what's going on. A wise NCO told me, non-commissioned officer told me years ago, if you ignore your soldiers, they go away. And I think that's true. And I think going out there and finding what's going on is important. One of the things that makes an organization and a leader better. Next slide. Move to the sound of the guns. What is your purpose and what is your mission? One of the things the soldiers do, and you saw it when the Boston bombing happened, the first responders that went to where the bombs went off were National Guard soldiers. That's what we're trained to do. The human nature tells you to run away from when there's a gunfire. What we do in the Army is we go to the sounds of the guns and we take action to make things better. And so in business, I think the same thing is true. You have to keep in mind of what your purpose is and what your mission is and what your core beliefs are. And I think that's true here at Notre Dame as well. The core values that you believe in, if you start straying from that, you get a response or an outcome you don't necessarily want. Any questions? I won't look you up in a global or anything. Next slide. Bad things happen to good units. Bad things happen to good people. And I found that you're judged over what you do. It's basically what you do. It's not when a bad thing happens. Is what is your reaction on the backside of it. I've been in the Army, like I said, for 36 years. I've had great days and I've had not so great days. The distinction between those two things is a great day is 99.9% of the time, and a not so great day is when you lose a soldier. And that's about the ultimate sacrifice you can have. But you will be judged in life and in business and whatever pursuit you have in terms of what you do when something bad happens. Next slide. Be the kind of boss you'd like to be. I think if I were to create a bumper sticker on what my philosophy is, it's to be the kind of boss I'd like to be. I have had bosses who threw stuff at me. I've had bosses who yelled at me. I've had bosses who cursed at me. And I got to be honest, that did not inspire me to do anything, work any harder. Being the boss that you want to work for doesn't always mean saying yes. It doesn't always mean letting you do what you want to do. It means having high standards. It means being loyal to the organization. It means making the tough decisions of what you want to do. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of things written about toxic leadership and tough leadership. I think I've worked for some of those leaders over the past. I worked for a guy, once I actually worked for him 4 times. And on the 4th time I was doing my evaluation counseling, he said, Tom, you know what you do well, so let's not waste any time on that. He said, what I'd rather do is talk about what I think your failures, your blind spots, your idiosyncrasies, and the things that you do that frankly make me mad. And 45 minutes later, he took a breath. He goes, what do you think? I said, sir, you gave me a lot to unpackage, so it'll take a little bit of time. But while we're being candid with each other, I'd like to take a few minutes and tell you what I think your failures, your shortcomings, your blind spots, and the things that you do that frankly make me mad. He was a very tough boss to work for, and we remain friends to this day. But a couple years ago, he said, what was it like to work for me? I said, it was incredibly intense. I said, but one good thing did come out of it. He goes, really, what was that? I said, well, one night I was driving home. It was about 10 o'clock. We just finished our wrap-up for the day. And I'm on Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and blue lights come on behind me. So I pull over, and MP, military policeman, comes up, and he says, sir, do you know why I pulled you over? I said, I've got absolutely no idea. He said, you were going 37 and 35. I go, really, you guys do that? So he said, he goes, yeah, he goes, speeding is important, and it's not safe, and you could get somebody hurt. I said, I appreciate that. I said, do you have a few minutes? He goes, sure, why? I said, I'd like to tell you about my day. I said, from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, I was doing PT, I was having fun, life was good. From 7 o'clock until about 10 minutes ago, my boss has been yelling at me. I said, so if you're gonna give me a ticket, please do, because TikTok, I'm losing sleep. I get to go home and in 5 hours, wake up and do it all over again. And I said, but if you're not gonna give me a ticket, I'm losing sleep. And so he goes, sir, do you promise not to speed? I go, yes, I do. He said, go on. So I told my boss, I said, you did get me on a speeding ticket one night. So I think the way you treat people with dignity and respect, the way you challenge people, the way you make them grow is kind of being the boss that you want to be or you want to work for, and that's kind of my philosophy. Next slide. Leadership by walking around and seeing things, and oftentimes the things that you think you see, you don't see. And I'll tell you a story. When I was in Hawaii in Battalion Command, I had a warrant officer who worked for me, who was a technician. And so as we finished out, I said, Donna, can you give me some critical feedback on how I'm doing? And she looked at me, she said, it's about the Frisbee. I said, what's about the Frisbee? She said, well, we do sports PT, and they don't throw the Frisbee to me. I go, what do you mean they don't throw the Frisbee to you? She says, because I'm a girl. I go, I don't believe that. She said, what do you mean you don't believe it? I said, I've got 2 daughters, and I think I'm kind of attuned to, if that were happening, I'd pick up on it. She said, sir, next time we play Frisbee, she said, pay attention. I said, well, I think I already do, but we'll see. So we're up on the North Shore of Hawaii playing Frisbee, and she would be close where the dean is to me, and she'd say, I'm open, give it to me. And the person with the Frisbee would look at her and then look at somebody else and toss it. And after a year, I hadn't picked that up. So it's not only walking around and observing what's going on, but actually paying attention to it. And that was a really important lesson to me, that sometimes you don't see the trees for the forest. So making sure that as you walk around and understand what your organization is doing, you do so with open ears and open eyes. Next slide. Build trust in your team. I think trust is the most important currency in any organization. It's trust of the leadership, it's trust of the soldiers, it's trust of everybody in the organization. And if you have trust in your organization, there's absolutely nothing you can't do. You see it in combat all the time. Units that perform very well are ones that trust each other. Units that don't perform as well don't have that common trust. But it's true in any kind of organization out there. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens just through actions and deeds and what you do to set the example. When I talk to new people in my organization, what I tell them is from today on, as you come on board, you operate with my complete trust. But I ask you to loan me your trust until I get a chance to earn it. Because I found that you are on display all the time as a leader, and if your audio and visual don't match, what you say and what you do don't match, then your trust is gone, and you don't have the trust that's out there. And so building that trust across laterally, horizontally, is really what makes a difference. Next slide. Oftentimes, your employees' lowest standards, or your lowest standards are your employees' highest standards. So if you think it's okay to take a 2-hour lunch break, guess what? Your team's going to feel the same way. And it goes back to building trust in what you do. The Army gives physical fitness tests twice a year. And when I was a lieutenant in Germany a while back, if I'm going to be candid with you, I probably was drinking a little too much beer and eating too much schnitzel and not doing enough physical fitness. And I was doing my PT run, and I finished the 2 miles in a blistering 19 minutes and 55 seconds. And from those cadets, that's pretty slow. And as I crossed the finish line, the NCO was keeping track of the time, looked at me and said, "You failed." No one ever told me that before. And I remember that moment like it was yesterday. I kind of looked at the NCO. I said, "That's not going to happen again." And so as a result, I have made every single day I start the day with PT. And I get out there. I ride my bike to work every day. I haven't actually driven to work since the 90s. I either run, bike, or walk to work, and it gives me kind of a time to do that. But I know that on that morning in Germany, when that NCO looked at me and said, "You fail," all the other soldiers that were watching me said, "That lieutenant can't pass a PT test. That's the new standard." And so sometimes when you fail, goodness comes from the failure when you recognize it and you figure out a way to make it better. But oftentimes people watch you, and I'm not being paranoid, but you are on display 24 hours a day when you're in a leadership position. When I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, a very competitive group of officers, we would do PT in the morning from about 6:30 to 7:30. And what I found is the officers got so competitive, they were actually coming in at 5, doing pre-PT from 5 to 6:30. We were doing it as a group, and I went up to the workspace where everybody worked one day, and there wasn't anybody there. It was like it was a Saturday or Sunday. And so I asked one of the NCOs, I said, "Where are the officers?" They said, "They're at the gym." I said, "Where are the soldiers?" And they said, "Well, they're hanging out too." They figure the officers don't have to be in here, they don't have to be here either. So the officers, while they were doing something important, having physical fitness, their absence sent a message to the soldiers: you don't need to be here. And if you don't need to be here, I don't need to be here either. Any questions, comments, disagreements? Next slide. Character matters. I will tell you, General Odierno, the former Chief of Staff of the Army, used to say the most dangerous leader in the world is someone who is competent but lacks character. And I think that's true because in the military and I think other organizations, if someone is performing, whether it's on Wall Street, whether it's in the Army, Navy, Air Force, you tend to look the other way sometimes. I mean, if you look at Patton, one of our great generals, he did a lot of things he probably shouldn't have done. But the fact of the matter is he made things happen and people look the other way. But character matters. That has not always been the case in the Army that I've been in. The Army of the early 80s was a lot different than the Army today. The Army I was in the early 80s, we were court-martialing about 25 or 30 people in my battalion. I haven't been part of an organization that had maybe more than 1 or 2 since then. It was kind of the Wild West. We'd come out of Vietnam, and we were kind of in search of who we are. And so what we came up with was the foundation of who we are is our character, and that's based on the Army values of loyalty, duty, respect, honor, self-service, integrity, and personal courage. Getting out there and understanding that character matters. Character being something that you do when no one's looking. Because sometimes somebody is looking at you, and if they're looking at you and you're not doing what you should be doing, that now becomes a new standard. But character matters, and if you go back and study President Lincoln, You know, there were a lot of times he could have taken the easy wrong, and we'd have two different countries now. But he did the right thing. He had the courage to do what he needed to do. He had the character to stand by his commitments, things like the Emancipation Proclamation, fighting the Civil War so hard, because character does matter. And an organization is truly based on character of the leader, character of the organization, as well as trust across the board. Next slide. At the end of the day, you got to be having fun. Whether you're here at Notre Dame or whether you're in the Army, whatever you're doing in life, if you're not having fun, it's probably time to reassess it. I think a lot of what you do, and it ties into the character comment as well, comes down to personal hygiene. You know, you got to, as you're looking in the mirror in the morning, you got to be comfortable with who you look at, and when it looks back at you, and that goes to character, and it also goes to having fun. I've got two daughters who are both grown. One's actually a first lieutenant down in Texas training, and what I told them growing up, I said, hey, you own your day. There are going to be other people who try and influence it, but you own your day. At the end of that day, if you've not had fun, if you've not made a difference, if you've not learned something, then there's nobody to responsible for that other than yourself. So trying to have fun and trying to make a difference in what you do, I think is very important. Next slide. Just a recap of what we have. Any thoughts, disagreements? Sir?
Yeah, I had a brief question about when the guy pulled you over for going 37 and a 35.
Yeah.
Isn't part of the equation of leadership is to also maybe perhaps go to his superior, you know, and diplomatically maybe inform his superior that you got this guy that took, because the average is 5 to 7 miles over speed limit.
Sure.
And his calibration might have been off. He might have been going the correct speed. Is it part of the equation to go to his superior and say, you know, diplomatically, this guy is, you know, maybe on the wrong road here. He's stopping people way before, you know, way before 35 to 37.
Sure.
And I was thinking, you know, that might help this guy, because it seems like he was screwing up. He's going to continue screwing up. So it's a part of the equation to go tell his superior to possibly inform the guy 5 to 7 miles over. Yeah, I mean,
No, that's a great point, and I would take that away as probably a leadership shortcoming that I didn't take the initiative to do that. I mean, that's a good point. And I don't want to badmouth the MPs, the military police, but about 6 months later, my my daughter got pulled over, and so she got a ticket for rolling through a stop sign. And so I go over there, and the MP I love our MPs, but sometimes they can be a little overzealous. And they told me, stand back. I said, I'm her father. They said, stand back. And so we almost had a Rodney King event there. But, so, you know, when it's your daughter, you get a little protective. And so he issued her a ticket. And so I watched him as he pulled away, and he ran through 3 stop signs, which just kind of set me boiling. So what I did is I paid my daughter's ticket. And then I made an appointment with the MP's boss. And I said, let me explain to you what happened. And she said, you want me to get rid of the ticket? I said, no, I already paid the ticket. I owe you the feedback. And I didn't do that when I got pulled over. So that's a good point. But I think that feedback loop is really important to let people know. And what I didn't want her to think is I was trying to get over. So I paid the ticket up front. I said, this is just me to you. I'm giving you some feedback one-on-one on what I observed. I got no problem with him enforcing the law. If my daughter ran through the stop sign, it's on her. She's responsible for it. But it was interesting, the example he showed as he pulled away by rolling through 3 stop signs. And if I had a camera, I would have taken a picture and shown it to you. But I'm telling you, that's what happened. And so I'm sharing that with you as a perspective of somebody in your community. So I didn't do that the first time. That's a good point. I appreciate the question. Cool. Question? A great question. I would say a couple things. One, lead by example, because if you are true in terms of your character and what you do, you set the example. I had an officer one time who was a major, worked for me, and he was called up to the colonel, my boss, and the word was that he was going to get his butt chewed by the colonel. So I said, well, have a seat. I'll go up there. He goes, no, he wants to see me. I said, you don't work for him. You work for me. And so I said, I got your back. And I went up to his office, and told him, he goes, where's the major? I said, sir, you don't need to see the major. He works for me. If you're unhappy with something, talk to me. And so doing things like that, makes a difference. And I would tell you, I think you can learn as much from a bad leader as you can a good leader. When I was a captain years ago in the 82nd, we used to our unit status report, and this is early computer days to date myself. And we were doing something, and my boss told me, he said, don't do it anymore, because it took 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, sir, our commanding general uses this. And he goes, don't do it. And so we went back upstairs, and my guy said, hey, I'm glad we don't have to do that. If you had to feed paper through a printer, it was kind of very 1970s. But anyway, so I said, no, we're still going to do it because the commanding general relies upon it. And so I printed them off, and I went to my boss and said, hey, sir, before we brief the readiness issues, here are the cards for the commanding general. He said, what did I tell you? I said, sir, you told me not to do it. And he goes, you disobeyed my order. I said, sir, I did, because I've been here and I understand and I believe the general uses them. And how about we use this as an affirmative decision? Take this to him and tell him it takes 10 minutes to do this. If you don't need them, we'd rather not do them. And he goes, I got your back. I've got big shoulders. I got your back, and I'm really angry you disobeyed me. I said, okay, sir. So about 2 months later, I get a call from somebody who worked for the commanding general. He said, sir, I've known the commanding general for about 20 years. I go, I'm not sure I like the way this conversation is starting. He said, I have never seen him yell and scream like he's screaming now. And I said, what's he screaming about? Why are you telling me? He said, well, he's screaming because the information from the readiness report he didn't have in his file. He was briefing his boss, and he couldn't answer a question. And he is now lighting up your boss's boss in his office. In fact, he goes, I'm going to hold the phone up. You can probably hear him. So I heard him, and I went down to my boss, who had told me not to do it. And we had an intercom system in the office. And so as I'm getting ready to knock on the door, the intercom blasts, and it's my boss's boss, who's just gotten yelled at from the general. And the colonel's yelling at Lieutenant Colonel. He goes, what the hell? You didn't do this. And my boss said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm 10 feet away. I'm listening to it. He goes, I have no idea what you're talking about, sir. But I do know Captain Seamands is the officer responsible for this, and I'm going to get on him because he obviously dropped the ball. So I, a little ethical dilemma there. So I stand there and I knock on the door, and he turns around and goes, Tom, how long have you been there? And I said, sir, I got to tell you, the general's yelling at the colonel, who's probably going to yell at you soon, and I want to give you a heads up. He goes, what did I tell you? I said, sir, you told me not to print those. And he goes, I told you I got big shoulders. I got your back. And so, at that point, I knew what kind of leader he was. And so leading by example, I think is very important. Good and bad. You kind of learn a lot about people. I also think, getting around, my aide here puts on my schedule what I call battlefield circulation. And at least every week I try and take an hour and walk around to the different areas of my organization. And it's not only to find out what they're doing, but also, you get somebody's workspace and you ask them, hey, who's that picture of? Well, it's my kids. You start talking to them, and you kind of build that trust across the organization. I think making sure the audio and visual match, when you say something, you follow up and you do it. And I think just it goes back to having a values-based organization and having the trust and character. I think kind of inspires people. And I think people are watching you even when you're not doing it. So if you're not living up to the standard, then people know that and won't do it. So thanks for your question.
Throughout all of our careers, we have moments of choice where you can either choose to go back to school for your MBA, or choose to stay at your job, or choose to take a promotion, or choose to leave the company. What are some of the guideposts that you have used in your career to help you figure out what have been the best choices for you and your family?
Part of it goes back to the very first slide about eat what you're given, sleep where you're put. Because sometimes you don't have a whole lot of say, and you try and make the most of it. I've taken jobs where people kind of cringe, when they hear I took the job, because it's not always real rewarding. The job I had that managed all the generals in the Army, I had a lot of my peers say, you're crazy. No one has ever made general out of it. And I said, I don't serve to be a general. In fact, I never expected to be a general. And so my goal would be to be the best at that job. If that means I retire out of it, that's what it is. And then when I went to the Pentagon on my previous tour, I went back to my old office, because I was a general now and they were managing me. And I said, the 2 previous guys had been here for about a year. I said, I think I need to stay here 2, 3, or 4 years. I said, now I may deny ever having this conversation because the job was not that, that was a kind of tough job. But I said, the fact of the matter is, as the Army draws down, we can't have that kind of turnover. And they said, well, if you do that, you're probably going to retire out of this job. And I said, I have no problem with that. There are some times, and part of it goes back to balance, and I am not a poster child for balance. I've worked hard on it. But having a conversation with your spouse or whoever's important in your life about what's going on. When I came out of battalion command, which is a lieutenant colonel, and it's, to me, I didn't have a job. I was commanding a battalion in Hawaii. I had a great boss. I had an incredible organization. And my wife said, who I've met undergraduate, so we've been married for a long time. She said, she goes, why don't you just walk off the parade field? She said, I have so many moves in me, and I think I'm about max velocity. I don't know how many more I have. And I go, I'm having too much fun. So she, continued to serve with me. And then I got ready to deploy to Iraq. And she said, I'm way past max velocity on our moves. I would ask you to retire when you come back from the deployment. I said, if it's important to you, that's what I'm going to do. So I came back. They have a thing called R&R, rest and recuperation leave. So about halfway through your deployment, you get to come back. And I came back, and I was telling her about all the stuff we're doing, partnering with the Iraqi army, all the things we're doing. And she looked at me, and she goes, you're not retiring, are you? I said, well, not now, but sometime in the future. So when I took the general officer management job, it was a 7-day-a-week job. It was probably the toughest job I've ever had. And I would come home normally about 9:30 at night, and I'd go in about 5 o'clock in the morning every day. I did that for about 4.5 years. And so one night I came home, and like I said, I ride my bike back and forth, and she said, I got to tell you, the 15 minutes last night between when you came home and when you fell asleep were really fun. That's not a good way to start a conversation. And she says, do you know what I am? I said, my loving wife? She goes, no. I said, the reason I get up and come home as quick as I can? She goes, no. I said, well, quick, give me a hint. And she said, I'm 308. I said, what's 308? She said, there are 307 generals, right? You give them your passion, your enthusiasm, your dedication, and I get what's left over. So you get a little, kind of wake-up call like that to do that. The Army's a team sport, so I mean, I was negligent over the years in not involving my family as much as I should have. When I came out of battalion command, I was told I wasn't going to the War College that year, maybe in the future, and so I made plans to stay in Hawaii, and then I was told I was going to go to Carlisle. My oldest daughter got very excited. She said, hey, my best friend in the world's going to be there. And so I said, that's good, that's where we're going to go. And so it turned out it changed. The general who had hired me said he wanted me to stay for another year and not go to War College. And so the head of personnel in the division said, sir, if we don't let him go, he may never go because here are the rules. And so we may terminate his career by keeping him. And the general said, I'm okay with that. So, I'm not sure what the message there was, but I stayed, and so my daughter was in a little bit of a funk, and so I said to her, I said, Katie, I can sense you're not really happy. She said, I'm not. I said, what's it going to take to break you out of the funk? She said, one of two things. I said, well, you thought about this. She says, buy me a car. I said, quick, give me number 2. And so, part of it, like I said, I've not been a poster child for doing that, but I think it has to be, figuring out what your branches and sequels are. And sometimes when a door closes, another one opens. When I was a captain in the 82nd, I was offered a chance to get my MBA. I'd taken the GREs, I had gotten accepted, and they came back and told me, the organization I now lead told me then as a captain, there's no money for you to go get your MBA, but we still want you to send you to West Point. I said, well, West Point was a payback. That's not necessarily where I was interested in going. So they called back about 2 weeks later, and they said, we got a great deal for you. And I said, what's that? I said, an MBA? He said, no. He said, we want you to go to University of Southern California, get your degree in cinematography, come to West Point, run our audiovisual department, and then your follow-on assignment is the commander of the motion picture detachment in Hollywood. So I'm thinking, not a bad branch and sequel. And so then they called back and said, well, you can do that or you can go to Hawaii. And I opted to go to Hawaii. So sometimes your branches and sequels you do, you do so hopefully with open eyes in terms of what they're going to lead or not lead to. So thanks for your question.
Have you ever had to lead a team where there were like
That's a great question, and I have. Part of it, one of the first things I try and do is the velocity of my listening. I try to have it pretty high, so I actually spend time listening to what's going on and trying to understand what it is. And sometimes it's a matter of trying to find what motivates or inspires people. Some people, I don't like being yelled at, but some people it gets their attention. Sometimes you have to kind of sit down and broker a deal. Sometimes you have to try and bring people together. In some cases, you have to vote them off the island. If there's somebody who's causing friction in the team, in the organization, distracting from what your mission is, you may have to fire them or get rid of them. But that is always a challenge. When I was battalion commander, I had 19 officers who worked for me. 18 of them I would have taken a bullet for. One of them I probably would have pulled the trigger on. And he was kind of a toxic personality, and I spent the better part of 2 years, kind of embracing him, talking to him, encouraging him, and I could never, reach him. And so what I started doing is I counseled him the whole time, and then when I finally gave him his final evaluation, he wasn't all happy. But I had counseled him along the way. I said, hey, listen, all these examples of things you didn't do. He ran my band. He was my band master. And so the whole organization's going out to the field to train. And he goes, sir, I'm not going to go. I said, what do you mean you're not going to go? He said, I can't play my instruments. And I go, says who? He goes, well, sir, we're in the field. I said, well, some of your guys are digging foxholes. The other guys are out there blowing the tuba. I'm good with that. But sir, they'll get dirty. I said, well, that's what you have cleaning kits for. And so, I mean, he was kind of a contrarian person. And so I spent two years, I never quite figured it out. But I think when you have that kind of friction, you have to either get to the source of the friction, or you have to, separate the team. Because at the end of the day, the organization is what you should be loyal to. I think in the Army, sometimes we get a little misdirected, and we think our loyalty is to our first line leader, our boss, or our small team. And the loyalty is actually to the institution, writ large across the board. A couple years ago, the Chief of Staff of the Army called me in and said the task I got was talk about ethical training for our General Officer Corps. So I put together 2 or 3 slides, and I went in there. I felt pretty proud of my product, and I started briefing, and the Chief of Staff of the Army took my briefing slides and turned it over, which is not a good sign. And so he said, what I want to know is, do we have a problem with our character in the General Officer Corps? He said, there are 2 articles in the Washington Post today that got my attention. One was a book by Tom Ricks that essentially said the last good general was Marshall. So everybody between them has been suboptimal. And he said then there were 4 pictures, one of General Petraeus, one of General Ward, one of a guy named Riley, and one guy named Sinclair, who was later court-martialed. And his question to me was, do we have a problem in their organization at large? Because the Army enjoys incredible trust from the American people. I mean, it's at all-time highs. And he said that it's really ours to lose. So how do we make sure we are not, don't have leaders who are corrupt? And so I'm writing all this down, and I said, it was Christmas Eve, he was giving me the mission. And he said, when somebody does something like those 4 officers, are they doing it out of hubris? Are they doing it because they don't know? Do we have a problem? If we have a problem, how do we get better? If we don't have a problem, how do we get better? If we do have a problem, how do we attack it and get after it? So I'm writing it down. I said, sir, how long do I have to do the project? He said, well, I'd like you to come back in 30 days and then in 60 days with a final solution. I'm thinking, sir, this is like a years-long thesis or a PhD program. And his issue that he was looking at was kind of going to what you're talking about. If you have somebody in the organization who's not representing the organization well, how do you resolve that and address it? So I think it's something that you look at from all different levels, but it's probably more pronounced at a small, at a team of 11 people level, because if you're not getting along, people lose their lives at that point. So, does that address your question? Cool, thanks.
Have you ever experienced culture shock or culture shock, and how have you handled it?
Culture shock as in a different culture? I mean, or culture shock as in millennials versus my generation?
I'd say that you can interpret culture in all different manners.
Yeah, I think there is some of that. I think that I think when I went to Iraq, it was a completely different culture. One of the things that makes the U.S. Army so good is we have the most incredible non-commissioned officer corps or sergeants in the Army. I mean, the world. So one of my jobs in Iraq was to partner with my counterpart in the Iraqi army. And so we were in one of our sessions, and I was walking through our wire diagram about how we were organized. And I got to our command sergeant major, who's the head sergeant who advises the commanding general. And I said, this is what you need to do. You need to have great NCOs like we have them, and that will make your army great. And so he and the translator get into this dialogue, and they're screaming at each other. And so I'm watching, going back and forth. And finally, the translator looks at me and goes, roughly translated, no way, Jose. And I go, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. I think as we deal with foreign countries, things like what our NCOs do, I think also females. The Secretary of the Defense made a great decision a while back to open up all our specialties to female soldiers. So they can be infantry, they can be rangers, they can be special operations, they can be armor officers, NCOs, which is great talent management. But when you go to some of the foreign countries, for example, Iraq, I had a colonel who worked for me who was partnering with the Iraqis as well, and they would not talk to her. I mean, they wouldn't talk to her. So we'd be in a conversation, and he would start talking to me. I said, no, she's briefing you. And he goes, no, I want to talk to you. I said, no, she's briefing you. And if you're not comfortable talking to her, then we'll get up and leave. It's just, it's a different culture. When we got over to Iraq, there was no bureaucracy, if you will, that was there. And so we were in a meeting with a bunch of Iraqi generals, and we were trying to set up a database just to simply track who was in the Iraqi army. Because we would go out and pay the Iraqi army every month with literally duffel bags full of money. And I asked the young officer who did it, I said, have you ever gone out to a formation and they said, hey, you gave me 100 extra dinar? He goes, no, that doesn't happen in this culture. And so we were trying to get him to do what was right. And so, because established a database so you knew how many soldiers from the army, and so you could pay them properly. And the generals didn't want anything to do with it. And I can't prove it, but I believe it's because they had ghost soldiers where they would get paid and they'd stick it in their pocket. So we were in this heated discussion with the Iraqis, and I go, hey, let's cut to the chase. How many people in this room support corruption? Nobody? Okay, this is what we're going to do. And because in their culture, you kind of kick the can down the road, and that's kind of counter to the way the American culture is. I think there's the similar thing like with how progressive we are with just talent management with females. A lot of the other armies aren't like that, especially in the Middle East, and they don't necessarily appreciate it. And a little bit in the Pacific as well. Just they look at the world through different lens. And as I assess somebody, if I go into a different culture, I wonder what they think of when they see me. So I mean, I love America, and I think we do everything 99% of the time right. But there's always room for discussion on should it be done a little bit differently. So I try to be open-minded as I go out there. But there are times around the world, and I haven't been to near as many places as our good PMS, Special Forces officer, who, if you stand up and you look at the stripes on his sleeve, each one of those counts for 6 months of combat. And Chris, you want to talk about culture? I want to put you on the spot, if you don't mind. I guess it doesn't matter if you mind.
Interesting to say about culture, I guess. Sorry for putting that. Kind of caught me off guard there, sir. But yeah, I spent several tours downrange in Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's always an adaptation period between the, our country and our officers and our soldiers and the servicing army that you're working with. So it's about getting to understand them and working by, with, and through them and accepting their cultural norms and not necessarily pushing yours on them, but being more receptive to theirs. I guess would be my one piece of advice with respect to culture.
One of the things that used to frustrate me when I was downrange was, if you watched a lot of the media, they tried to judge the Iraqi army by American standards. And so great officers like the lieutenant colonel here has been in the Army 18, 20 years, has deployed, gone through training. And we were coaching and training an Army that if you made the wrong decision, you could be killed. If you made the wrong decision, your family could be killed. The palace that I worked in, the Iraqi general I partnered with wouldn't go in there when I first met him. I said, why not? He said, oftentimes if you went in there when Saddam was president, you didn't come out alive. I mean, so some of it's well-founded, but part of it is understanding and try to figure out. In Afghanistan, the vast majority of people in Afghanistan are illiterate. So when you go over there to try and train them, you can't give them a manual, say read the manual and come back and we'll talk about it. You know, so every culture has a little different things. But I appreciate your question. That's one I'll probably be thinking about as I walk around. So thank you.
I'm actually going to follow up on hers. What do you see about the millennial side of things? You know, new generations coming in, and frankly, the millennials are actually on their way out as the new generation. So, how do you manage that as an HR person in the military?
It's a great question, and part of it, we're taking a look at how we recruit, how we try to market to them, how we reward, how we incentivize things. General Barno, who's actually a former boss of mine, who's been very critical of my work. In fact, last time he wrote an article, I said, hey, sir, interesting read. How about you come to my organization, spend a day with me, and see if you still feel the same way? And he came out, but one of the things he talked about was, you know, millennials see it a little differently. So right now, from the time a lieutenant gets commissioned to the time they make captain is 4.5 years. And his proposal was, let's make it 8 years and get a chance to maybe send to grad school and do all these other cool things. And my question for him was, maybe it's a generational thing, but I think when I was a lieutenant, if you told me you got to wait 6 more years to be a captain, I'm not sure I would have stuck around. And I don't know if the millennials will too. We've actually are in the process of changing our retirement system because the way the system is set up now, only about 19% of the people who come in the Army, raise their right hand, stay long enough to retire. So there's a new retirement program that will allow people to invest in a thrift savings program like a employee-sponsored program, and then they'll leave. In today's Army, if you stay till 10 years, there's a very high probability you're going to stay till 20, unless you get in trouble. And so in the personnel HR business, it's pretty easy. If I need somebody in Korea, and I tell a NCO with 11 years or an officer with 11 years, I need you in Korea, or pick a place, they may not be happy they're going there, but they'll go there because they've hit their tipping point. I think in 10 years, when you can invest in your thrift savings program, and I ask an officer, I need you to go to Korea, and their spouse has got a good job, they've lived there for 3 years, they've got a house, I'm not sure they're going to stick around. And so I think it's fun. We're trying to get our head around how they react differently, and what that means to us in terms of managing the force writ large. One of the things we did when we did the drawdown is we took I took a captain's rank and I drew what I thought a captain was thinking. And we did the same thing for a sergeant, because I felt that during the drawdown, if we knew what was important to them and how they thought, we would have a better chance of getting the drawdown right. And I don't know if we got it right 100%, but we tried to get inside their mind. I've done a lot of reading on millennials and the generation coming after them. I think it's going to fundamentally change, you know, how we do things. A good buddy of mine was up in Alaska. He was giving a presentation, and there was a soldier over there on their iPad, and he's looking over at her, and he's getting angry because she's on the iPad and she's not listening to him. And so finally he goes, stop. Why don't you pay attention to me? She said, sir, you just referenced 3 regulations. I've already downloaded them on my system. I am listening to you. And from his point of view, she was completely tuned out. But in reality, she was very tuned in what he was saying. So I think we need to do some adjustments. I just haven't quite figured out what they are yet. You have any suggestions or any ideas?
I have a lot, sir. I was in the Army for 9 years, so
Okay.
I did not get in trouble, but yeah, no, I'm very interested to hear exactly what you have to say about millennials. So.
I think we're in discovery learning, and we have to get it right because, you know, with the unemployment rate of 4.5%, propensity has not changed over the last 10 or 15. After 9/11, it spiked, but then it's gone back down. And so as we ask citizens to come into uniform to serve and support and defend our country, I think we have to understand how they're thinking and what's important to them. There was a program called Future of the Force that Mr. Carson, who is the head of personnel HR for the Pentagon, was working on. And part of it was to make a more permissible system, so you can go, if you're the active, and next week you want to go in the reserves, guard, you can do that. You ought to be able to do a sabbatical. We do have a sabbatical program now that you can take time off. But I think we have to be creative in order to attract and maintain that talent. If we don't, we're going to be wondering what happened and looking in the rearview mirror, and that's not a good place to be. Thanks for your service. Well, another question?
One of the big things about the Mendoza College of Business is that commerce can be a force for good in the world. And part of the way we really talk about that in our classes is when we're faced with tough decisions. And one of the things that's always been fascinating to me is where people find the strength to make the right decision. You talked about earlier being able to look yourself in the mirror the next day. I'm wondering if you might be able to share a story about when you had to make a tough ethical or moral choice and how you worked through that to get to what you believe was the right answer in probably a very high pressure type times.
Yeah, I should share you one example. I kind of thread the needle a little bit on this one. I've been in the job as General Officer Manager for about 60 days, and I went in to brief the Secretary of the Army. And before I went in to brief him, the head lawyer, the civilian lawyer, and the military lawyer were going to be an Inspector General. So I asked them to come in with me, and I asked them, I didn't realize they seriously outranked me. I was a colonel, they were like 3 and 4 stars. I said, would you mind meeting 10 minutes ahead of time so we can lay our cards on the table so we can provide the secretaries with some honest feedback? They said, sure. So we get out there, and I'm in the room with, the outer room with these 2 lawyers and the Inspector General who can inspect anything he wants, so it's doesn't have many friends. And I go, where are you, gentlemen, where are you in this? And they told me they were, in this direction. And right before the door opens to the Secretary's office, they go, where are you? I said, I'm actually 180. And so the door opens and we go in. I didn't know the Secretary very well. And I hadn't talked to my boss about my position. I thought I knew where he stood. And so the Secretary said, what are we going to do? And the lawyers lay out as if they were arguing before the Supreme Court. They almost convinced me. They were very, very clear, very compelling. And he goes, so is that what we're going to do? And I was sitting right next to the Secretary, and one of the lawyers said, Sir Tom's got a different opinion. And I said, yes, sir, I do. And I'm thinking, I'm getting fired today. And so he goes, the Secretary goes, well, what's your, and the Secretary was a lawyer too. He goes, why do you say that? And I explained why I felt that way. And I literally, this never happened to me before. I had an out-of-body experience. I looked down, I saw myself at the table, and the Secretary saying, this is your last day. But I'm arguing with him, and he's saying this. I go, yes, sir, but this, and you can do that. And sort of what they're recommending is political expedient. No one will ever question if you do what they're recommending, but I think it's frankly wrong. And so I'm having this heated discussion with the Secretary of the Army, and thinking, it's been a good ride. I'm not sure this is it. And so at the end, he paused, and I'm thinking that's my career. And he paused, and he looked, and he said, we're going to do what Tom said, which my respect for him was pretty high already, but it just went through the roof because the easy decision, the easy wrong in my mind was to do what they recommended. So as we walked out, one of the lawyers put his arm around me. He goes, I think you're dead wrong, but I respect you for standing by your guns. And if you had asked me before I went in there, would I do that? I would like to have said I would have, but I don't know. I mean, it's sometimes when you're in the friction point, you kind of figure out what you're made of. But I later told my boss, hoping that he agreed with my position, what I had done, and it was okay. But I could have gotten fired a second time that day, based if he had disagreed with me. But I think at the end of the day, and when I took that job, like I said, everybody outranked me by 1, 2, 3, or 4 stars. It was kind of liberating. Early on, I realized, for the last 28 years, or whatever, 27 years, I've always done what I thought was right, and it served me well. And so I'm never getting promoted out of this job. So it was liberating. I said, I'm just going to be completely candid with people. And I got yelled at often. I got told that, I wasn't managing people, I didn't know what I was doing. Usually people come into my office, like a 2 or 3 star, and they close the door, tell me what an idiot I was. Now, what they didn't know is the decisions they were mad at were not made by me, they were made by the Secretary or the Chief of Staff of the Army. So they'd yell at me, tell me what an idiot I was, and they'd walk out. And about 10 minutes later, they'd come back and they say, you didn't tell the Chief of Staff of the Army what I said about him, did you? I go, no, that's between you and I. But to me, it was liberating knowing I'm never going to get promoted, so I will always continue to do what I think I've done up to that point, is just do the right thing. It's not always easy to do. About 2 months later, I'm the same Secretary of the Army. I got in to brief him, and I briefed him on, he goes, I need to go see 2 senators on the Hill on this. And so I briefed him. I said, sir, here's the status. And so as next day, his executive officer calls me and says, He says, Tom, I've never heard the Secretary of the Army cuss. I go, Chuck, why are you telling me this? He goes, he's cussing at you. I go, why? He said, because he went over to the Senate, he told the senators A. I go, it's not A, it was B. That's what I told him. He goes, it's maybe your last day in the Army, my friend. So I go up to the Secretary. He goes, he's not happy. He's going to yell at you. And the Secretary was a very calm guy. He never raised his voice. Came around the desk, put his finger in my chest, which is not a good thing, and said, he goes, did you tell me A? Little ethical dilemma. I didn't tell him A, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to argue with the Secretary of the Army. And so I said, sir, it really doesn't matter what I told you. And he goes, what do you mean it doesn't matter what I told you? You know, I went up on the Hill and I told these two senators this, and they called me out on it. I said, sir, if I left you with the impression it was A, then it's on me. It doesn't really matter what I told you. I must not have been clear in my brief to you. And if I wasn't clear, I own all responsibility for what happened. And so he says, here's what's going to happen. He said, I'm going to call those two senators. He said, you're going to stand in the room and you're going to listen to me when I talk to them. So it's kind of one of those, what's the worst punishment you can get? And so he called the senator, both senators, and said he was professionally embarrassed, which again is not a good thing for the Secretary of the Army to be professionally embarrassed based on something you've done. And so at the end he goes, you're dismissed, which is, it's not a very good thing either. So I left and I briefed my boss later on, the Chief of Staff of the Army, what had happened. And he took his glasses, he put it on his head, and he goes, how long did you think you were going to be in this job? And I go, here it comes. I was tenured, I had 3 years as a colonel, so I thought worst case happened, they fire me. And I said, sir, I assumed I'd be here for 4 years with you. He goes, let's make it 4.5 and call it even. He said, just don't do that again. I said, got it, sir. So it's tough. It's sometimes you don't see it coming, and then it kind of goes back to the personal hygiene thing. If you can say something and feel comfortable with what you look at or who you look at, then so thanks for asking. Any other questions, comments, disagreements? Well, I know it's late and there's a lot of studying to do, so I won't keep you any longer. I would like to just kind of wrap up as I started, say thank you for coming. Thanks to our great cadets who will have a future service to our nation. Thanks for stepping up to the plate. At less than 1 out of 5 of our American citizens qualify to do what you're going to do, and you're joining our Army at a time where we're at war, and that's hugely powerful. I was very excited when my daughter decided to come in the Army. My wife, not so much. But for what you're doing and what you're going to do in the future, thank you for doing that. And for everybody else who came, I appreciate your time tonight. I got a lot out of our questions and our discussion, and I'll stick around for as long as you want to stick around for. Thank you very much.
General Seamands, on behalf of the Mendoza College, I want you to thank you for spending time with us and for the leadership lessons here. And I would like to give you this small token of our appreciation.
Well, thank you very much.
And I can assure you that it doesn't violate any regulations.
Well, thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Let's give the General another round of applause. I would also like to invite you all to join the General up front for a reception here. And you can talk more with the General, and if you can do so, try to persuade him to root more for Notre Dame when we play Army again. Thank you. Have a great evening.